Well, welcome everyone to the Transportation Commission meeting on October 14th. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:01. Before we start, even though we don't have a big group here, at least just kind of do quick introductions for everybody since we're still sort of all new to this commission.
Sure. My name is Mark Hussing. I have been in Davis for 10 years. This is my first meeting. I'm an alternate on this commission. My background is I am an advocate for climate. I also am born and raised in the Netherlands, so I've lived sustainable transportation for the first 30 years of my life, and I'm hoping to bring some of that to Davis. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Ferrollo. Been on the commission and its predecessors I started in the Unitrans Advisory Committee in 2021, moved over to BTSSC, then through that became their liaison to the Unitrans Advisory Committee, so through that wound up on this commission. I've been on Davis Transportation Commissions for about 3 years now. Just for my background in transportation, I'm a transportation planner for the state. Primary way of getting around is transit, rail, biking, and walking. So, excited to be here.
I'm Brooke Ostrom. I'm chair. I'm retired, and previously I was worked in marketing and business development in the civil engineering and environmental planning fields. And I think this is my third year on the commission, and the previously the BTSSC.
I'm Skylar Campbell. I was on the BTSSC for, 2.5, 3 years, something like that, prior to it folding into this commission. And I'm an attorney. I currently work for the Contra Costa County Employees Retirement Association, but I previously worked for City Attorney's Office and represented various public agencies with a law firm, and worked for Sacramento Regional Transit as well for some time. I guess I'm also a rail commuter for what it's worth.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Amole. I'm sitting at UC Davis. I sit on the ASUCD Unitrans Commission. This is my first year.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. With that, Jennifer, could you please do a roll call?
Sure. Skylar.
Here.
Mark.
Here.
Andy.
Here.
Brooke.
Here.
And then Nicholas.
Here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Great. With that, seeking a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the agenda? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Passes unanimously. Next, we'll move on to brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and council liaisons. This is the time for brief announcements from city staff, commissioners, or council member liaisons. No announcements from council member White. Do the commissioners have any announcements?
One quick announcement. As some of you know, I'm also on the YOLO Transportation District Citizens Advisory Committee. I probably should have mentioned that during my intro a minute ago. But the next meeting, there's been some glitchiness in meeting scheduling there recently, but it looks like the next meeting will be October 29th at 6 p.m. Those are at YOLO Bus headquarters, which is in Woodland. And also YOLO Bus, I know they're looking at their board tonight is discussing the possibility of restoring some service on their express lines that have been suspended since the start of the pandemic. That would be 2 additional trips on the 43, which serves East Davis and downtown, the 230, which serves West Davis, and then restoring Route 44 to South Davis, which has been suspended completely since the pandemic. But looking into those are mainly like commuter-focused routes to Sacramento, but they're looking at restoring some service there. The start date for that, if it gets approved, would be January 1st of next year.
Great, thank you, Andy. Ryan or Jennifer?
Yeah, so I did want to let you know that we're going to start construction next week for speed humps on Cannery Loop and Temple. The project should take about 2 weeks to get the actual humps in place, and we'll be striping them about a week later.
My announcement is that our Safe Routes to School coordinator started work today. Her name is Lindsay Terry, and I'm excited to launch her and get her into the schools and starting programming.
Great, thank you very much. So now we'll move on to public comment. I'm opening up the meeting for public comment at this time. Any member of the public may address the commission on matters which are not listed on the agenda or are listed on the consent calendar. Speakers will be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Speakers will be asked to come to the podium and to state their names for the record.
Good evening, Commissioners and members of the audience. My name is Hiram Jackson. I'm on the school board, but actually I'm here as a representative of the Yes on Measure T campaign. You all may know that Measure T is on the ballot for November to help support operations of a second library that's set to open in South Davis. I'm here because you all are engaged members of the community, and I'm asking you all to consider voting for it. Mary Stevens, our main branch here, is at capacity on many school days and other days throughout the year. What this is a $49 increase in order to per parcel and $22.50 for multi-unit dwellings. If it doesn't pass, then the likeliest scenario is that the County Board of Supervisors may divert some money that normally goes to the Mary Stevens branch to the new branch, which will probably be open in about 2026 or so that it can be open a day or two, and the corresponding reductions would apply to the Mary Stevens. So everyone in Davis actually benefits from its passage. I just remind you that libraries offer many benefits and such as like traditional books and things that you might normally check out. In 2024, it's a place you can go to if your Wi-Fi internet connection goes out where you might be. You can use the computers there. It is a cool place to go in the summertime, and I mean that, well, in both senses, just on a hot day, and of course it is a cool place. And of course, it's a place where people can go, for instance, children and adults who are learning English as a second language can get resources to improve their English speaking ability. There are also plans for makerspaces, I understand, and this requires 2/3 to pass. So this is not necessarily a simple majority. 65% does not cut it, and that's why I'm here. And so you will see around town that it's a very popular measure. There are lots of signs. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will accrue 2/3 on election day. But I hope that you all will consider voting yes on it. And I understand there might be even some up-ballot races that might want to ride our coattails. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment at this time? Okay, next would be the consent calendar. These are items on the consent calendar, are non-controversial and can be approved with one motion. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve? We don't have any items on the consent calendar, except I'm assuming the minutes of the last meeting.
Or I didn't publish the minutes, I just didn't have them on the agenda. Sorry.
Do we need to do approval of the minutes?
I'm not sure we can since it's not on the agenda.
Okay.
I will probably have to come back to you at the next meeting.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So since there's nothing else on the consent calendar, at this time we'll move to regular items. For these items, we'll receive a presentation, and commissioners will have a chance to ask clarifying questions about the presentation and the staff report. Please hold all comments and discussion until after we hear public comment. Commissioners must be open to new ideas and listen to public comment. After public comment, we can then discuss the item and provide our own comments. Let's see. Jennifer, the first item is introduction and presentation on the short-range transit plan.
Correct. I am here to introduce Ron Kilgun, who's going to be giving us a presentation on this short-range transit plan.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Ron Kilcoyne. I'm the project manager for TMD, Transportation Management Design. We've been hired by the City of Davis to do the short-range transit plan for Unitrans and Davis Community Transit. I will go through a presentation here. This is the agenda, and then, well, you know, one of the key things we want your questions and feedback at the end of this. Doing the short-range transit plan, we, you know, there's a number of issues that we need to cover. We are taking into account other planning efforts, and one of the other planning efforts is the concurrent YOLO Transportation District short-range transit plan that we're also doing. So we have the same team that is actually doing both the YOLO TD SRTP and the Davis SRTP concurrently, so we are able to coordinate those particular efforts. You know, one of the things we also want to do is balance university demand with city mobility needs. One of the earlier things that we're finding is that some of the early comments we've seen is that you know, Unitrans serves the whole community, but a lot of people kind of look at it as primarily serving the university, and some of the early stakeholders' responses that we've gotten, you know, we'll want to try to address. Developing tailored service alternatives. What we mean by this is, you know, we don't take a one-size-fits-all. Unitrans is fixed route, Davis Community Transit is on demand, but we do want to look at other approaches if they make sense. You know, if a micro transit like Beeline that YOLO TD has in other parts of the community, we want to take a look at that. You know, we don't have any, you know, we're coming with as an open mind, but we want to do that. We want to, of course, focus on the customer experience. That's what it's all about. You know, we're here to serve the community. We want to make sure that that people that use that is a positive experience when you're using Unitrans and DCT. We want to make sure that we have a strong community outreach effort, which I'll talk about in a little more detail. And again, you know, when we talk about tailored alternatives, that includes looking at, does microtransit make sense in any applications? And, you know, on the other hand, while we try to be as innovative as possible, our approach is, you know, we've done a lot of these, and we learn from each one, and we, of course, you know, do tailor to the community, uniqueness of each community, but we do have certain, you know, approaches that we've learned all over the time. So, you know, kind of an overview of our approach is we, first of all, we want to make sure we confirm the project goals, objectives, and approach so that what we're working on lines up with what we agree is the goals of the project. Then, of course, we start off with an existing conditions, market assessment, and service evaluation. This is one area that performs the foundation, is an assessment of what exists today, what is the market, what are the underlying factors, what are the changes that are likely to occur in the future. That serves a foundation. And we tie that in with the community engagement. Both of those two pieces form the basis. And from there, we develop the alternatives. And then once we have alternatives, and we're looking at, again, a full range, not only just how the routes and schedules are, but alternative services, also looking at fares and labor issues. Then, you know, we develop recommendations or develop alternatives. We then go back, have another round of community engagement to make sure that you know, what we're recommending makes sense to the community, get feedback, get ideas there, And then we finally documented in our final plan, which includes implementation recommendations. So we began the project in June. We are underway doing the existing conditions analysis currently, as well as the phase 1 outreach. We did want to wait until UC Davis was back in session before we launched our community survey, which will be both looking at existing riders as well as former riders and non-riders. We've also, during the month of September, launched our a number of stakeholder interviews. I believe we have about 3 more to go. Then that, again, using those 2 pieces, we'll be working on the service recommendations. By the end of the year, we should have some recommendations. And then the early part of 2025, we'll have our phase 2 outreach. And then from there, we'll develop the final plan, which will come to the, actually says Unitransport, to the Davis City Council for review. So, you know, what is successful implementation? Well, the plan must work as planned. There's no surprises. And one of the things we pride ourselves in the projects we work, and many of us, like myself, have actually spent most of my career on the public side actually operating services. So, you know, we want to make sure that we don't just have stuff that looks good on paper, but will in fact work as envisioned. And of course, we do, while we take both a high view of the system, we also, when we get down to recommendations, make sure we get and narrow things down to make sure we have, you know, routes. If we make any route modifications, the buses can actually make the turn safely. If we introduce any stops, that they are ADA accessible. You know, I mean, in the case of Unitrans, typically, you know, all the buses go to either the silo or to the Memorial Union, but in a lot of systems, we also have to make sure that there are restrooms for the drivers. Connections, you know, we're taking an integrative approach. We're not, you know, we want to make part of the reason that YOLO TD and the City of Davis wanted the same consultant to do both projects is to make sure that the 2 systems are integrated and that connections work as intended, because individual trips are quite often not limited to one bus route or even one system. And we want to take that, you know, that holistic approach. And again, any route changes, the running times must be realistic, and we also must accurately estimate the resources needed: buses, drivers, dollars. So engagement, as I mentioned, is a very, very important part of the project, and we are trying to take, you know, we're taking a number of different approaches. One is we have a number of stakeholders that we're reaching out to, and I'll lay that out in a future slide. You know, we also want to balance online and in-person engagement, and this will be particularly in the second phase when is one of our experiences in our first phase when you're trying to gather people's opinions about the system. You know, sometimes having open houses just don't attract people. It's like once you have recommendations, that's what attracts people to come out. So what we're doing in person is having pop-up events. Today we were at Memorial Union Transit Center. Tomorrow we'll be at Silo. We're doing I think the Holiday Festival, the open house on the 26th, and then the Downtown Davis thing on the 1st of November as pop-up events. We do, of course, make sure we want to reduce barriers to participation. Our materials are also translated into Mandarin and Spanish. We also make sure we work on our documents, or our stuff is online, is workable for people with vision and hearing impairment. And then, you know, as we say, we're in the process of conducting, you know, consulting with stakeholders. And, you know, whenever we do these projects, we work with the community to see make sure that what we do is unique to that community. I mentioned stakeholders. These are the groups that we've targeted: low income and unhoused groups related to low income and/or unhoused families, transportation program coordinators, health medical organizations, older adults, individuals with disabilities, Latinx, Hispanic groups, as well as Cantonese, Mandarin speaking groups, major education institutions and student groups, as well as local business groups. And of course, if anybody has anyone that we, need to join, that would be as well. Engagement with, now this is just, we just started the process, and of course one of the things we find when we've met with stakeholder groups is quite often, sometimes we get some conflicting comments, but these are just some key points that we've come out. One is overcrowding at peak times and difficulties for disabled riders at those times, a desire for more frequent service and longer service hours. And today we have a little, besides encouraging people to take the survey, we also have a little interactive activity that we have, and longer service hours, particularly on weekends, was the big winner today among that. There's another concern was poor coordination between Unitrans and YOLO Bus, and as I mentioned, having doing both projects will help us certainly focus on making that improvement. Need a better outreach, lack of awareness by Spanish-speaking seniors and low-income groups, and need for improved shelters and infrastructure. So those are some of the early comments that we're getting from the stakeholder meetings that we have. On the other hand, that's the negative side. On the positive side, Unitrans service is very convenient for students. Unitrans drivers are friendly and helpful. Unitrans service is reliable. The bus stops are well placed, and it's affordable for students. So I mentioned the 4 pop-up events today, tomorrow, and then on the 26th, the Davis Food Co-op Halloween Party, and November 1st, Discover Davis. So we do have a community survey, and it's structured in a way, if you go online, it's got different logics. So, we ask, do you ride Unitrans? And if you say yes, you'll get a set of questions. If you say no, it'll skip. And we also have a part for Davis Community Transit, yes or no. And then we have, of course, if you answered no to both, there are some general questions that we ask about what do you think, what is your awareness of Unitrans and DCT, and what changes would you want to make to see you use more often. And then we ask some demographic information, which we use for Title VI reporting and also just get understanding. It also helps us to make sure that the survey responses we get are responsive of the community. If we find that they're all heavily, I've done a couple surveys where it's like the initial round, all the responses have incomes of over 100,000, and you go, is that really representative of the whole community? And we do that to make sure, and that also we can later on, if we see the responses are heavily weighted, we can try to make effort, reach out to those areas that are not responding to make sure they're involved. We do have a project website and a story map. A story map is a good way to visualize, to explain what the project is, so people can see, can learn about the project, understand where we are. We'll keep continually updating that, and that, of course, people to look there. That's also ways you can get into the survey for that. I mentioned one of the first things we do in the process is the market assessment, and what we call the 4 Ds: density, diversity, design, and demand. When we talk about density, we're not. Some people I know that said, "Oh, you were talking about density." No, we're not talking about. We're basically talking about the intensity of the development, because that has a big impact on the potential for transit in that area. When we talk about diversity, we're looking at the types of uses. You have single-use areas or diverse use areas, and each of those have different needs in case of transit. Design, we focus on the design of the street network and where and how you could potentially run buses, and where you may not, and how they're designed and how they impact. It also focuses on the access to transit, because people don't just magically appear at bus stops. They need to get to those bus stops, and the majority of people need to get there by walking. And so what is the pedestrian environment? How is that access addressed? And then demand focuses on total trip patterns. And when we look at this, we not only look at what the transit is currently doing, but we also want to look at what are the travel patterns in Davis right now. And we have, we're able to use a service called Replica, which, mines sources from a number of different sources to determine what travel volume is. And for example, this chart here shows compares travel fall of 2019 to fall of 2023. This is all travel. This is all trips in Davis over a half mile, whether it's by foot, bicycle, driving, or transit. And what you see here is something that's somewhat typical that we're finding in a lot of communities. If you'll notice, AM travel is down, but PM travel is up dramatically. Including late into the evening. And this is a pattern that we're finding on many of the projects we're working where you don't have as much AM travel, but you have a lot more afternoon and PM travel. And so this, of course, is we will be able to update this as well, get more recent 2024 data that we can also use to see, and this will help determine, again, where you need to devote your resources when you're developing in transit. Now, this takes a look at the individual Unitrans routes, and as you can see, this is just comparing FY 2022-23 to FY 2023-24, and as you can see, there are a few routes that have dropped. But most of the routes have shown some growth between those years. Now the V route, I believe, is what serves West Village, which is a newer area, and that's where you see the heaviest ridership, and we've seen over the course of the time the biggest growth. Now this looks at DCT, Davis Community Transit, and as you can see here, there has been a big drop in 2021, which is when the height of the pandemic, and it's been growing back since that time. Again, this is it hasn't totally gotten back to pre-pandemic levels of ridership, but it is gradually growing. And again, this is a trend that we've been seeing throughout the country. So the next steps, well, we're going to synthesize and analyze the feedback that we get from the survey, from the stakeholder meetings, and we'll complete the market analysis, and then we will develop recommendations, and in those recommendations we'll look at how we can improve integration between Unitrans and YOLO Bus, how we can better serve internal non-UC trips without compromising service to the university. What I mean by that is internal general public Davis trips that are not going to and from the university. Improve reliability, that's become an issue. Explore alternative approaches to better match service to customer need. Plan for new development that's occurring in the city. And then look at ways we can improve efficiency and effectiveness of Davis Community Transit. Also, we'll develop a financial and capital plan. We'll solicit input on all our recommendations, and then we'll modify those recommendations and prepare the final plan. So, at that point, I think I'll open it up to you for answering any questions and any feedback that you may have.
Great, thank you very much. So just as a reminder, this is a time for clarifying questions, and we'll be having discussion after the public comment section. So are there any clarifying questions from commissioners? Mark?
I think I have one, and if not, you can call me back. The clarifying question is, I heard you speak about the need to balance university demand with city mobility needs, and the phrasing of that question suggests there is a tension, and I'm not sure if I understand what that is. Maybe you can clarify that.
Well, I think there was, again, this is early in the stakeholder outreach. There was comments made that, I think there's a feeling, I think some people feel that Unitrans is for Davis students, and it doesn't meet the needs of Davis residents that want to go other places within the city. And the other comment I think we got was, well, you can go anywhere, but you have to go through Memorial Union or the Silo. So again, because Unitrans is a student-run system, that's the bulk of the market, we're not going to say, oh, we're just going to, let's create some crosstown routes that don't serve, UC Davis. So the issue is, can we both on a communications level as well as a service design level do a better job at accommodating internal trips within the city of Davis that don't involve going to UC Davis? Thank you.
Andy?
Couple quick questions. The first, so I just wanted to confirm, so when you mentioned that you're doing this Unitrans plan and the YOLO TD plan, so is it going to be, are the final products going to be two different plans, one for Unitrans and Davis Community Transit and the other for YOLO TD, or will it be one combined plan for all of the agencies?
It will be two separate plans.
Okay, thank you. And then also a question on you brought up microtransit. Is that something that there's been, have you heard in your outreach with stakeholders, is there a desire for microtransit service, or is that something that more is just a reflection of other places, even like Woodland and West Sac, for example, having microtransit?
Well, actually, I think this is one thing that was asked for us to look at in the area, in the RFP for the project, to see if that makes sense. But we did get some comments about first and last mile issues that may or may not be addressed with microtransit. And I mean, we try to, there are a lot of places that want to think microtransit is the end all and be all, and it isn't. It only has applications in certain places. And one of the things our approach is to take that realistic approach, because we have no financial interest in any microtransit company, so we're not going to gain money or lose money by what our recommendations are. But we do want to, and we may at the end of the day say, hey, there's no place that makes sense. So we're not coming in. There are companies that would come in and tell you, microtransit's going to solve a lot of your problems. We're not there. But on the other hand, we have found a number of projects where microtransit did make sense. And microtransit is on-demand service. It's a new term for dial-a-ride or paratransit that's existed, but it is, what makes it different, and I think what the difference is, now you have apps where people can schedule the rides, and it's a little more customer friendly. But it's, you have Unitrans, which is very, very productive. And, microtrans is no way going to match the productivity that Unitrans has.
Thank you. And then last but not least, will the plan look at specific funding scenarios, where it'll say if you have for example, we've had some discussion here about Transportation Development Act funds, which as many of you know can be used for transit, but also in certain cases can be shifted to road projects. So would it look at for example, having all that funding dedicated to transit versus the status quo of using some of it for roads, or will it be a bit more general than that in terms of just outlining?
We can do that. I know that the YOLO one specifically does want different financial scenarios. And we, a lot of times we'll take what we call the constrained approach, which is, okay, existing resources and how do you maximize ridership and community benefit. But then you can also look at, well, how would you optimize it if you didn't have those constraints? And we like to do both, just so what you could have, but this is the best you can do with what you have.
Thank you.
Nicholas?
Sorry. I had a question.
Yeah.
So for the routes that don't go to the MU, will they still be student-driven?
Oh, well, at this point, we're not planning on changing the Unitrans. Well, first of all, we haven't proposed any routes at this point, but Unitrans is a student-run system, so I would envision that anything that Unitrans does is going to be driven by students.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more clarifying questions, at this point, we'll open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? If there's no public comment, we'll close the public comment and open it up for discussion from commissioners. I think at this point, you're looking for additional feedback on the
Yes.
plan or the process. Commissioners?
Yeah, so, one on the, you were just talking about it, but the prospect of routes that don't go in and out of campus. I think even just some thought of routes that could consider people who might get off early would be helpful, because it is true, and even for students, as a former UCD student who took Unitrans a lot, getting to the grocery store from the apartment could have been difficult because it wasn't necessarily serviced by route. But definitely as a community member now, it's hard to find a reason to use the bus, just because it pretty much tend to go to campus. So I would say that, that community members complaining about that sounds accurate to me. I've heard community members complain about that to me personally, and I can sort of relate to that. Another thing community members have complained to me about, and I don't know to what extent Unitrans is the, given the confederated nature of our public transit systems in America and California and in the Sacramento region, I don't know that Unitrans is necessarily going to be in a position to solve this problem, but given that I'm speaking to someone who's also working for YOLO Bus, there's no reasonable way to get to Dixon from Davis without getting on a car and driving there. And it's just kind of an obvious blind spot. And if there's any potential to look at some sort of solution through Unitrans or through YOLO Bus, I think a lot of members of the community would appreciate having a reasonable transit path to Dixon. And that's my piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I hope I didn't, when I made the comment about bus routes not going to the campus, we don't know what we're going to recommend to Unitrans, and I'm going to guess that probably all of them are going to still go to campus. So I don't want to, we haven't gotten to that point where we're looking at it, but we do want to, the point was that we do want to sort of look at, are there ways we can better accommodate internal trips, and it might be through YOLO Bus. So I don't have the answers to that. It's just one of the things we're taking a look at, so.
Andy?
Yes, thank you. A few comments. First, I'm going to ask a question about microtransit earlier, so I wanted to expand on that discussion. And specifically, in general, I'll just off the bat, I am a skeptic, more of a skeptic of microtransit. I think that especially seeing, like we've had, Commissioner Campbell just mentioned some of the cuts that have happened, like for service west of Davis to we used to have. There were certainly issues with the frequency, but we did have like fixed route bus service to Winners, Dixon, and Vacaville through YOLO Bus and Solano Soltrans. But the YOLO Bus line, the old 220, was converted to microtransit during the pandemic, and that has pretty much been a disaster, I have to say. It's one vehicle that serves like it's supposed to be like all service between Davis, Winners, and Vacaville, so it can be like, it could be an hours long wait time, and predictably the ridership is still like a third of what it was during the pandemic. So I think that's a strong lesson that microtransit, I'm not going to say it has no place in anything. I mean, there may well have been paratransit, of course, is a place where we need more of the microtransit model. But it certainly is not a replacement for fixed route. So I want to make a strong recommendation that certainly that we stay away from replacing any Unitrans or YOLO bus fixed route service with microtransit. So I wanted to, and then even if we're looking at a service expansion, also just looking at the effectiveness. If you have funding to expand service, I mean, yes, it's possible to do it through microtransit, but it could well be more effective to do that. I'd say in most cases it is more effective to do that through fixed route service. So having that be the priority, I mean, there's just so much room to improve our fixed route bus service, and even through like the preliminary feedback that was presented here, but it seems like people want more span of service, more frequent service. It's fixed route service that's going to provide that, not microtransit. So I wanted to start with that recommendation. Also, again, I think also continuing the discussion about what's happened to the connections to the communities west of us, like Dixon, Winners, and Vacaville. That's a place where I think there could be, I mean, traditionally, of course, it's YOLO bus and then Siltrans towards Solano County that's operated the service between the cities. But I think there is possibility where it could be, at least in certain circumstances, and I know that there are some logistical hurdles that we've discussed before, but there certainly is, from a efficiency perspective, there could be some potential for Unitrans providing that service. Since, I mean, if it's YOLO bus, the bus has to deadhead from Woodland to get here. Well, if it's Unitrans, of course, it just starts right here. So I'd recommend looking at that potential, potentially looking at ways to address some of those logistical hurdles, like around Unitrans buses operating on the highway. And then also, I'd say like service to the airport is another thing to look at along those lines, since that's something where YOLO bus, especially after the redesign, that's a very long trip. And we also recently lost the Davis Airport service that was kind of a medium price point between public transit and something like Uber or a taxi. So looking, I know like Unitrans has had a successful like Thanksgiving weekend, or like shuttle service around Thanksgiving, but potentially making that a more regular service and looking at options for that. And then finally, regarding the point about coordination between Unitrans and YOLO bus, I'll point out that, I mean, as a transit rider, one of the main issues there is that, of course, one is like the conditions at the stops. I mean, the Mason second stop is one that I've had some bad experiences with and comes up a lot, since that's the main place to transfer between like YOLO buses coming in from Sacramento and Unitrans that takes you like down to Cobell or into South Davis. But those stops lack benches or shelters. It can be quite hot there, very dark at night. And also, with the scheduling of those services right now, YOLO bus is every 45 minutes outside of the traditional commute hours, while Unitrans, depending on the time, is every 30 minutes or an hour. So of course, just that difference in the frequency makes it hard to actually coordinate the schedule and potentially implement some time transfers there, which could help a lot. So I'd suggest that is something to look at. And then also regarding, on the paratransit side, I know one issue I'm aware of with, in terms of coordinating Unitrans's and YOLO bus service is I know that like Davis Community Transit, I mean, like the zone, because Davis Community Transit is based on like the Unitrans fixed routes and the distance from those, while YOLO buses, paratransit for inner city is based on the YOLO bus services. There are parts of town that are covered by DCT, but not by YOLO bus. But so if you're in one of those parts of town for an inner city trip, you have to, I mean, from what I've heard, you have to get on basically like the YOLO bus paratransit won't pick you up if you're like within a mile of a Unitrans line, but not a mile of a YOLO bus line. So someone essentially has to first take like a Davis Community Transit and book that trip, and then transfer to a YOLO bus paratransit for inner city trips. So finding a way to just have that be done like with a one-seat trip, I feel could go a long way to improving efficiency. So what you would suggest that is something to look at. But I really appreciate this effort, great presentation, and excited to see this move forward.
Thank you.
Any other discussion from commissioners?
Yeah, so I do have one. See if I can explain it well. Yeah, so I'm just looking at the annual ridership by line, and you can see like the V line is way higher than the other ones. And I work very close to this line. I don't take it myself, but I see it a lot. And just one thing that I've noticed about the service pattern that I just find kind of interesting is you have like kind of two lines that run sort of very similar routes, and they come at the same time. So essentially what you end up getting is like kind of back-to-back buses doing like kind of a similar one. So I've just always wondered if you could stagger those maybe, get like increased frequency with the same amount of buses. And it does kind of tie into, you mentioned one of the things people complain about is overcrowding at peak times, and then also desire for a more frequent service. So I'd just be kind of curious how, like, people see a solution to overcrowding be running more frequent service, or if it is to like kind of run just like more buses with kind of a fixed schedule. I don't know how that pencils out. But yeah, specifically with that line, it seems to be something that must be a challenge, and you can see, yeah, the ridership sort of bears that out.
Well, it's one of the things that we will take a look at. You know, I mean, I was talking with Jeff earlier today about, you know, because we talked about it, there's ways we can sort of concentrate routes so where some are more frequent, but then it's like, the other problem is, particularly in the morning, students tend to be just in time, which means if you had 15-minute service and a half-hour service, you probably still find that one of those buses is going to be overcrowded because they all want to ride at this particular time. They don't want to go 15 minutes earlier or 15 minutes later. So that's one of the issues we'll have to deal with. But, you know, we're going to take a look at all of this, you know, stuff. I mean, if there's routes that are competing with each other for the same passengers, does it make sense to consolidate them? You know, that's one of the things we'll take a look at.
Also, as just a follow-up, I'm just interested how complaints from people about overcrowding, how that gets weighed in terms of, like, against other concerns, I suppose. Because I guess you might have people that are very angry, you can't get on this bus, it's too crowded right now. But
No one goes there, it's too crowded.
I'm just, wondering like how that, because you could, if that's like your central concern, you might get something that looks one way, or if that's like lower down the tier list, and maybe it's like overall average rider experience, you might end up getting something else. I'm not sure. Yeah, yes.
So I actually come from West Village, so sometimes what happens is they send like a supplementary bus, so it's not like overly crowded, it's like just crowded enough for a certain amount of students to get on one bus and another amount of students to get on the other bus. So kind of eliminates the complaint in a sense, just to clarify that.
Mark?
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. A couple of, picking up on the question I asked before, it sounds like there's an opportunity here to educate that the general public in Davis would appreciate buses a lot more if it realizes that a bus full of people is 20 or 30 less cars that they have to contend with the traffic. I think people in this room are nodding, I think we know this, but I think generally speaking, people are quick to complain and not as quick to kind of take a slightly longer view and recognize that if bus ridership increases, and everybody benefits, even those who might be sitting behind the wheel of the car. So maybe that's maybe a recommendation to try again to explain that this is not a benefit for just students. This is a shared benefit that the entire community benefits from when it comes to traffic patterns, when it comes to emissions. Regardless of drivetrain, our buses are going to be a much more sustainable way of getting around. And I think some people in Davis might be receptive to that, but it might have to be brought to them because it might not pop in their head if it's not put there. And then they might actually be much more patient and receptive. Following on that, I see the market analysis approach based on current trips, historical trips, but what's missing is what we are hoping to achieve, and also maybe what we're needing to achieve trip-wise when we want to be responsive to a climate action adaptation plan. Again, public transit is a much more sustainable transportation choice than most of the way people in Davis get around, particularly those of us who use our cars. So again, we all benefit. We have climate goals, I think specifically action item TR6, subsidize public transit so it's free for all to use, promote expansion of public transit, increase operational frequency, etc., etc. So that is missing from this presentation, and I would recommend you try, I realize this is not trivial, but to try and frame the plan also with what we need to meet our climate goals. Okay? And this is maybe I should have asked it earlier in the clarifying comments question, but I'll hope you'll forgive me for asking it now. How many of the Davis Davis bus ridership is DJUSD students, specifically high school students? Because here is a demographic that potentially might be targeted to try and increase ridership that is not just like framed as this is only the students benefiting. This could be a potentially very meaningful demographic that might be using public transit, specifically buses, much more effectively. Of course, you would have to make sure, and this may already be the case, that routes are amenable and also timed appropriately. But if that, in the extent it hasn't been considered in the current plan, I would recommend that we do that.
Yeah, and I can just state, at least for Davis Senior High School where my wife works, the buses do not stop at an appropriate time and are functionally useless to high school students, at least for getting to school at the high school at a regular time.
Well, there you go. I think there is a recommendation then to really look at this carefully, because we can target an expansion of ridership that I think, again, we would all benefit from for all the reasons stated before. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just add on to that also the middle school students. There's a number of middle school students that also take the buses, and I think that also needs to be worked into that analysis of looking at the times and for those students as well. Mark?
Especially for all the middle school students whose parents park right in front of my house in the morning, dropping them off. Just putting that out there.
Thank you. We can talk about what we've done at Petland to try and prevent some of that, because actually it's been somewhat successful. One more separate item, I heard you say that locations of bus stops are factored in. I heard you say that most people don't magically hit bus stops. I would agree with that, but you alluded to the fact that most of them arrive there by foot. What are we doing to make sure that those people who need to arrive there by bike or e-bike, maybe from slightly longer distances, I tend to notice Americans don't like to walk long distances, so what are we doing to make sure that those who choose to use a bike or an e-bike to get to the bus stop or from the bus stop are able to get there safely, park their ride there safely, keeping into account that there is now a diversity of different bicycles in shapes and forms and sizes, so that they can all be stored safely, not impeding other traffic, whether it's pedestrians or cyclists or vehicles, obviously. Maybe be a little bit more forward-looking as to the type of ridership and vehicles we want people to use, not just what we currently think they're using right now.
Yes.
That's the question, Jay. And sorry if you've already covered this and missed it, but Commissioner Furlow's question brought it to mind is, we know that there's a significant fraction of students who can't afford to live in Davis because there isn't available housing. I'm wondering if the university is keeping an eye on how commute patterns are changing as more and more students are unable to live in Davis, and whether that's been accommodated by YOLO bus routes. I was thinking about you mentioned Dixon and Vacaville. And then the other, last week I took the train down the bay and then just saw a lot of students on board at this particular time. Is the university planning for these shifts in students?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the university, I can't speak for the university. I can say though that between this project as well as the YOLO bus project, we are looking at travel patterns. And where there are increases in travel, that's part of the reason we want to look at that and detecting it and saying, hey, there's an increase here. this is an area where transit could probably play a bigger role. So we are looking at between these two projects. And, in terms of who ends up providing the service, whether it's Unitrans or YOLO Bus or Solano. And we also are doing work for Solano Transportation Authority, so at least there's an opportunity there to try to work with them in terms of how they can modify Solano Express service into Yolo County. So we're trying to address, we are through this process trying to address how to improve those transit.
I mean, the reason I say the university is, Commissioner Pearl brought up this kind of idea that I hadn't heard before about what if Unitrans actually takes that. But I imagine, obviously, it's no secret, the university has a lot more money than the Yolo Transportation District, that's in Solano. And I just wonder if there's any decision makers thinking about taking responsibility for access to campus from students, poor students who can't afford to live here because we don't have enough housing. So it's an open question, it's kind of a comment, but I'm just curious
That's a good point.
to hear that,
Yeah.
whether that's being discussed or not.
Mark?
So to that comment, the UC campuses, all 10 of them, are supposed to submit the greenhouse gas inventory reduction goals in December of 2024, which includes Scope 3 emissions. And this should hopefully be the starting point for campuses, including ours, UC Davis, to take ownership, because they are going to be asked to take ownership for the emissions that result from commuting, including the commuting of the students who come to campus. And that may be a good connection point to start this discussion, because I can tell you the data right now are probably not there, but they should start to collect those.
Thank you.
Brooke, before we
Yes.
end this item, Jeff Flynn, the director of Unitrans, would like to speak.
Hi, thank you, Commissioners. I just want to clarify some of the comments we heard. So we do extensive coordination with the Davis School District. We have our P and Q lines are timed for the high schools and the middle schools. We have a special T line, which is also timed for both. So we do coordinate with them. We do have lines that are designed for them, and youth do ride Unitrans for free now. We've had that program in place for about 4 years. Youth comprise less than 5% of our ridership, but it has doubled since we introduced Fare Free Youth a few years ago, which is currently being subsidized by the UC Davis undergrads. Another one was the West Village issue. Like if you're a regular observer, it doesn't make much sense what we do. But as Ron alluded to, Unitrans has a super peaking problem, I would call it, where the student rider is that just-in-time rider. When we operate service that goes a little bit sooner than, or earlier than that, the buses are empty. So we end up having to super peak the service, which is not cheap and leads to other issues. So the buses run on top of each other by design, because that's how the population is choosing to travel. And when we try to adjust those habits, what happens is we just end up bypassing a bunch of people. The university is currently the major contributor to the Unitrans service. And so we do try to accommodate that rider, because they are the major financial contributor to the service. But it is an odd thing to do to have buses on top of each other. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. There's no other discussion from
I guess I would
commissioners?
just point out, I was curious why I heard multiple times that there was no reasonable service to the schools, and you mentioned a P&Q, and I just looked at a map. And like, let's say you're going from South Davis to the high school, you literally have to traverse the entire town. That's probably why. I think it's basically a circle loop, and the high school is in the middle of the circle. So, so it's not nothing, but it's very close to nothing. But that'd be my point on that, that's all.
Great. Okay, so with that, thank you very much for the discussion. That was, I think, hopefully that's provided you some input and direction that's helpful on the short-range transit plan. All right, with that, we will move on to our next item, 5th Street, L Street to Cantrell Drive Improvement Project. And Ryan, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so we have Adrian Eagle here from Aaron Pierce, who's going to lead PowerPoint. And then I'll follow up with some closing remarks. And we can go to questions. I think we do need 1 minute for a quick rearrange.
Right. Again, I'm Adrian Engel, Aaron Pierce, principal in our Sacramento office. Happy to be here again. Listening to everybody on the commission, it sounds like you've been involved for over the last year or two, so some of this may be repeat for you, but I'm happy to say that we're back to do the final presentation for the 5th Street corridor study, highlight some of the recommendations that we'd heard previously, and how we've modified our internal recommendations for Ryan and his staff to move the project forward. So I have quite a bit of a presentation here. I'll try to get through the beginning part quickly to get on to the alternatives being considered next steps to focus on for you guys, since you've seen parts of this before. As a reminder, the project area is on 5th Street between L Street through the Pole Line intersection to Cantrell Street, where the roundabout is at the east end. Relationship of the timeline related to the project area. There's been a lot going on in that area and why the project was started in the first place. One of the things that preceded our project was the occupation of the Sterling and 5th Street apartments within the project area, so new student housing there with a higher demand. In October of 2021, the city completed the sewer lift station project, which involved a lot of trenching down this part of 5th Street. And so when they were done with the trenching and repaving it back, they restriped it in a pilot setting with a lane reduction as part of that, sort of a quick build, not a lot of opportunity to plan for, but just to get it done. And so part of this project that we were brought on to do was do some analysis of the results of that lane reduction to make sure that operations were good. And they ended up doing the striping of that with temporary materials. And so part of this was to identify whether or not it would be formalized with more permanent materials as is, or if there were recommendations for a slightly different configuration of the roadway, or putting it back the way it was if it wasn't working or satisfactory with the community. In spring of 2022, that was also the time when the city opened up the Pole Line Road Olive Bike Bridge connection. That created another service area for people riding bicycles to access Pole Line Road and eventually to 5th Street at that intersection. So expanding the area of coverage for that, so knowing that there'd be even a higher demand between the new student housing and the bridge connection, the Pole Line 5th Street intersection was key to the part of the project study. We had our first public workshop in early February 2023. We got a lot of feedback from the community, did some online polling, and then used that information to help build our proposals that we came back to the BTSSC with. Again, here's a couple photos of those key projects that came in, one looking up the Pole Line Bridge where you can see the existing shared use path on the west side of Pole Line that feeds the Pole Line and 5th Street intersection, as well as the Sterling 5th apartments. Related to the pilot project, it was an opportunity for the city to implement the buffered bike lanes from the Beyond Platinum plan, so they were already on the books. They put buffered bike lanes, which I have some pictures of in both directions. They did preserve the on-street parking with that project on the north side where the existing businesses are. Towards the west end of the project. They also look to improve safety at the 5th Street and L Street intersection with some improvements to the bikeway design, and then improving the connections to downtown Davis for these new users, and as well as connections to the east side of the city. Input from the workshop we got when we talked to the public. As a whole, everybody was pretty happy with the demonstration project, the pilot project, and the lane reduction. We did not get any reports anecdotally from a lack of capacity for cars on that roadway. And we did hear from a number of people that they enjoyed the bicycle experience much better with the lane reduction. The community members were interested in learning more about the intersection treatments, and part of that process was to go through a bikeway evaluation before we could determine the intersections, which will be part of the latter part of the presentation. Again, a lot of other discussions sort of stemmed from that, especially around the south side of the roadway and whether or not bidirectional travel was needed as it allowed today on the shared use path. So many of the alternatives will talk through that. And then we did hear some comments about challenges with U-turns and people accessing the businesses that are heading east on 5th Street and how that could be accommodated through intersection improvements or other things. And then finally, the one comment we did hear a number of times, so there was a desire to remove the fence that was at the curb line on the shared use path near the PG&E lot there in terms of being a nuisance for people on bicycles. And there may be some progress on that as well. Again, here are some of the photos of what the project was done with the pilot project. On the north side of the street in the westbound lanes, you can see the parking was put up against the curb with a door zone buffer, the bikeway, and then a travel side buffer as well. On the south side in the eastbound direction, you can see the fence adjacent to the shared use path, the new buffered bike lane, and then the travel side buffer. Observations from the pilot project: we did traffic counts in May of 2022 after the pilot project had been in place for a little while to see how it was being utilized. On average, there were 12,000 cars on 5th Street, which was very similar to the previous counts, historical counts we'd seen. So there wasn't a lack of capacity or usage with the lane reduction. We also did some pedestrian and bike counts, and we saw over 325 people walking or biking through the pole line and 5th intersection during those peak hours each day. So quite a bit of use at those crosswalks and intersections. So the current configuration with the free right turns was definitely a noticeable barrier for a lot of people trying to access that intersection. We did also look at collision data to see if the lane reduction had caused any increase in collision. There was one reported rear-end collision in 2022 in terms of the pilot project near 5th and L, but there didn't seem to be an increase in roadway hazards or traffic incidents related to the project. We did take those existing numbers, run them through some traffic simulation software to see how they operated, and both in the morning and the afternoon at the 3 key intersections along the project, we noted that all of the intersections operated adequately per Davis standards based on the volumes that are out there today with the lane reduction in place. So we did not see operational issues with the lane reduction either. Related to what's next, after the pilot project, we had some key considerations. One was looking at maybe elevating the buffered bike lanes into separated bikeways and creating a vertical barrier between the cyclists and the moving vehicles. How to accommodate the on-street parking loading zones at those existing businesses. Determining whether or not a sidewalk and shared use path conditions remain or we separate pedestrians from cyclists. And then there was also a desire for pedestrian crossing near the community gardens and then the end street greenway connection as well. And then transit access and stop amenities were a common consideration as well. And then finally, probably the biggest issue with the project was really looking at new configurations for the Pole Line Road and 5th Street intersection, specifically the channelized right turns with the high volumes of bike and peds. Created a lot of conflicts, and there can be ways to improve that, especially with the lane reduction and freeing up some space. We did a walking audit with staff and the project team, looking at both the north side pedestrian environment and then that south side, as I mentioned, as well as there's the location of the community garden just to the west of Pole Line Road where that crossing could be benefited, and you'll see that in our plans as well. The typical cross-section that's out there today to the east of Pole Line Road wasn't discussed much in the original project when we brought it to the community because the lane reduction did not take place in that part of the community, and this was the existing condition that's out there near the Sterling Apartments. And so the on-street bikeways were sort of left in place with the one lane in each direction and the center turn lane. There are some pedestrian crossings out there with pedestrian refuge islands and some existing transit stops that we could connect to with the restripe. We evaluated 3 primary different alternatives as part of this study. If you look at them in terms of columns, column 1 is the buffered bike lane option that looks both at a near-term stripe only kind of configuration. That would really be putting back what's out there today as part of the pilot project in a more permanent status. Or option 1B, which would take the same bikeway configuration but widen the sidewalks and take some of the extra buffer space that's out there and actually reclaim it for the pedestrian environment and be able to plant trees and widen sidewalks and narrow the entire pavement width with that option. Option 2, the second column, looks at one-way separated bikeways. So having a separated bikeway in both the east and westbound direction, one lane in each direction, both a near-term paint and plastic option on the top and a more permanent option on the bottom with a raised curb or an elevated bikeway adjacent to the sidewalk. Again, allowing space for additional landscape planting along the sidewalk buffer and creating that more physical barrier between the travel lanes and the bikeway. One thing I will note with the option B in these permanent conditions, with the raised bikeway buffers, there are some constrictions related to fire access. And so in that option, we did have to look at removing the existing raised median that exists on the very west end of the project. I think there's about 700 feet of raised median that would have to be removed to be able to provide access for fire vehicles to get through if there's an emergency. So that's why you'll see on those options, the raised median is removed with a few trees removed as well. Option 3, that last column, has a 2-way separated bikeway on the south side. So keeping that bi-directional bike travel on the south side that exists today. In the near-term condition, it would be done with paint and plastic, and in the long-term condition would formalize that 2-way bikeway, separated bikeway with the landscape strip and narrowing the sidewalk slightly. So basically replacing the shared use path that's there today with a 2-way separated bikeway and a sidewalk adjacent. I will mention on the north side of both the separated bikeway options, we are showing parking separated bikeways in both of those conditions. So the parking is floating out beyond the bikeway buffer and the bikes are up against the curb on the separated bikeway options. And so there was some concern when we showed the options 2 and 3 to the community, especially the business community, about those opportunity for parking reduction because of daylighting in the separated bikeway, as well as loading opportunities and people getting goods to and from those businesses along the curb line. I'm going to skip through these slides. You guys can look at them at your leisure. But what we ended up with after the last BTSSC meeting was a recommendation for a modified option 3 solution that takes the north half of option 1, which is the buffered bike lanes with the parking up against the curb, and the south side of option 3, which has the 2-way separated bikeway on the south side of the street. Both with a near-term option using just paint and plastic, and then a long-term option which would widen sidewalks, elevate the bikeway or create a solid buffer, and narrow the pavement width through that option. And so with this modified option 3 solution, we went through and created a concept design for the entire corridor, both the near-term and long-term, and was able to do some additional analysis at the intersections related to these bikeway configurations and lane configurations. And so with that, we focused on both the 5th Street connections. This one shows the near-term solution with the buffered bike lane on the north, the separated 2-way cycle track on the south side, and what types of improvements may be needed to conform the bikeways to the existing on-street bike lanes on 5th Street to the west of L Street. In the near-term option, There are some challenges with the amount of space that's available out there to be able to do this, and so it would probably have to be done with some sort of signal timing, or creating a bike-only phase or a scramble phase to allow bikes to travel diagonally across the intersection for the out-of-direction travel on that south side. With the long-term solution, we think there's an opportunity to build a partial protected intersection here that allows those out-of-direction movements to traverse around the intersection to be able to get lined up with the bikeways in a safer manner, not having to make that diagonal movement. Also created some opportunities to connect to the on-street bike lanes north and south of 5th Street on L as part of that protected intersection in the northbound direction. At 5th Street and Pullen Road, we looked at two different options. This first one is a protected intersection, so by removing the channelized rights and with the lane reduction in place, we were able to make a much smaller, tighter intersection for travelers, as well as connecting the two-way bike facilities on the south and west lanes with the protected intersection features and multi-way crossings, including connecting to the north and to the east on those in-street bikeways. This will create a much more compact intersection both for bikes and for people crossing the street, as well as still have the capacity to be able to accommodate the different movements that are happening. You'll notice that there are right turn pockets on on all of the corners to be able to accommodate the higher volumes of right turns at this intersection. But it also allows you the opportunity to separate your right turn movements from your bike crossings if that's desirable in terms of the final design when it goes forward. With that, we also looked at a roundabout option for Pole Line and 5th Street as part of the analysis. We started with a single lane roundabout in all 4 directions and analyzed that. We found that the single lane roundabout failed, and because of the high volume of turning movements here, the roundabout itself would lock up because of especially the high volumes of right turning vehicles and then the higher volumes on the south leg of Pole Line Road. We did 3 different alternatives that looked at adding in bypass right turn lanes, and we found that the smallest footprint that we can accommodate is what's shown on here, is adding a single bypass lane on the southwest corner to be able to accommodate an acceptable level of operations for that bikeway. With that, we did include separated bikeway paths around the roundabout as well, and separated sidewalks. So trying to facilitate connections to the separated bikeways on 5th as well as the shared use path on Pole Line. So the next steps for the city today, I'm going to integrate feedback, explore grant funding opportunities since there's no designated funding for moving any of these larger improvements forward, completing the designs with the preferred elements, doing some additional cost estimating for those funding needs, as well as some future community engagement.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. At this point, unless there's anything else from staff.
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. So the paint that was put down initially was Braille paint, it wasn't thermoplastic, and it's definitely starting to wear. And this is a location where I'm looking to incorporate your comments, make any changes we need to, and get it before the city council for consideration, and then ultimately try to get that restriped next summer or in the spring as soon as it's warm enough to start painting again. And then, as Adrian said, long term, we're going to need to look for some grant funding to finish design, fine-tune anything that needs to be fine-tuned, and ultimately get this constructed.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Any clarifying questions at this time from commissioners? Andy?
One quick one for Ryan, just regarding that last comment about the restriping. So just to clarify, would the restriping be putting in like more what was described as the near-term option in the presentation, and then the grant funding would be for long-term, or would the restriping just be like more just repainting what's there now, and then it would be both for near-term and long-term in the presentation you need grant funding for?
My intent would be to strive at something as close to what we want in the future as possible. If I need to move a concrete curb or something else, I will not have funds for that. I will bring back whatever those changes are in that striping plan for your consideration. But my intent is to stripe it, especially with the cycle track up against PG&E side. I think we have room for all of that, and we should be able to make it work.
Thank you. Mark?
I think my question is clarified, which is why I hesitated. Can you speak more about the fire truck accessibility, which gets used a lot to say that we can do certain things? And I'll frame my comment by saying I witnessed an accident on campus the other day, and I called it in, and I saw a campus fire truck come out, and they had no trouble whatsoever navigating a curb and parking smack in the middle of the bike lane while they were tending to their patient. So maybe the clarifying question then is, I don't see how a simple physical low curb would be a physical barrier that would prevent a fire truck from getting there where they need to be in case of an emergency.
Yeah, so the standard we're referring to is CAL FIRE, which really applies to every community in California, requires 20 feet passable from curb to curb. If that's two-lane traffic, like you see on most residential streets, it's very easy to meet, but when you start talking about medians and one-way traffic and road diets, it becomes a challenge to meet sometimes. I can work with the fire marshal and see what options we have, but most of those would result in something like a mountable curb to allow the fire truck to get up on the bike lane, which is also not desirable.
So clarifying question on the clarifying question. A regular curb would not count towards or would not be allowable within the 20 feet because again, at slow speed they can get there on there perfectly fine.
Correct, and this is a standard that I'm not really sure how it originated, but it was explained to me that they really need the road to maneuver around an abandoned vehicle or whatever the other issue is, fallen tree branch in a rainstorm, and still get to their destination. And anything that kind of obstructs that is a concern.
It strikes me then that the concern here is not whether a conventional curb would prevent them from doing their much very important job. It's the 20 feet will still be navigable by a large fire truck. Maybe we'll get to the recommendations in the later presentation.
And that's definitely something I can follow up with fire and see what our options are.
I had a clarifying question. So you showed an exhibit on the improvements, noted as pole line to Cantrill. Currently, I mean, that's sort of a 2-lane section in there. You're showing there's a 1-lane section. Are there any lane reductions that would go to Cantrill, or is that still going to be a 2-lane section?
On the other side of Cantrill to the east, it's 1 lane in each direction.
But there's a 2-lane section between the roundabout and pole. Yeah, it kind of goes back and forth, and it's not well striped. But
Correct, and this standard that's up right now, or this detail, would replace that essentially 4-lane road with this exhibit.
so that would extend to the roundabout. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
And it essentially removes one of the travel lanes in each direction, put a line buffer in for the bike lane.
One other clarifying question I had was it wasn't addressed in this report very much, but in the report that was sent to us, the discussion of a mid-block crossing there at the garden. Did any of the modeling look at potential issues with queuing from that crosswalk and how that would be affecting the pole line Fifth Street intersection?
Yeah, we included that as part of our operations and didn't see any adverse queuing from either pole line back to that crossing or from the crossing to pole line with the lines that are out there.
Great, thank you. If there's no other clarifying questions, I'll open it up for public comment at this time.
Hi, I'm Trish Price with Pike Davis. Good to see you all. Thank you for the presentation and to staff for bringing it to us again. So we agree the pilot has turned out to be pretty successful. I mean, we've been pretty happy with it. We funded some of the study initially and had a lot of input on it and have been, like I said, happy. For consistency's sake, we would support a single direction option on either side. It just, I know there's the protected way, but moving the protected bike lane onto the street is not the best option, in our opinion. We would prefer to have it up off the travel lane. We would also like to see actual physical barriers between, instead of just painted buffers. That's to make people feel safer. This is a really wide street, and the posted speed limits are almost always exceeded. When I drive there in my car, I have a community garden plot. There's usually 7 cars behind me because I do drive the speed limit. So it's kind of a scary place especially for people who aren't confident on bicycles. We do have a great opportunity to use that wide sidewalk on the south side and make a really nice facility. We would like to see that happen, and it would be great to extend that out so that we could have some pedestrian space as well. We want to make sure that that the street standards in the transportation element only allow a 10.5-foot lane, so everything was marked 11 feet. If that's curb to line, that's fine, but line to line, it can't be more than 10.5 feet for motor vehicles travel lanes, so we want to make sure that that's followed. And a true pedestrian refuge in the mid-block crossing would probably also be really helpful, just because cars do go fast, and it would be intimidating to try to time your crossing with both directions of traffic. And the roundabout, as presented, I understand there are challenges, but it's just unacceptable. We need to, really design for our most vulnerable users, and not for the convenience of the least vulnerable users. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Thomas Howe. I'm a UC Davis student and urban and regional planning student at UC Davis. So in regards to the corridor improvements, I think it's important that there's as much grade separation as possible for the bike lanes, especially for the long term. Making sure that these lanes are separated from the street level will help ensure that in the future there is a much harder time if the case were to ever arise that they would be reclaimed by the roadway. And as well, in terms of the city's evaluation of this project, I noticed that there was mentions of levels of service inside the memo and the staff report. However, when this project does come to be hopefully built, I would like to point out that for CEQA projects in the state, at least, California Office of Planning and Research has found that levels of service are not a very good way of investigating transportation impacts, whereas something like vehicle miles traveled are much more useful in making sure that we assess what are some of the really big problems related with transportation, which are air quality and greenhouse gases. And so really focusing on levels of service can put us into a mindset where increasing the capacity might end up improving the roadway, where in reality we should be focusing on getting cars off the road instead. So I think VMT analysis should be more readily available for this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Anthony Palmier. I'm also part of Bike Davis, but I am part of a nonprofit that called Cycling Without Age that brings elderly people out on bike rides. And one of our two of our primary places that we go are Rancho Yolo, the senior community near 5th and Pole Line, and Galileo Place, which is the adult day program that's on Drew, south of I-80 off of the Pole Line Bridge. And as Bike Davis and other pedestrian advocates wanted to see a roundabout at that intersection, but not that roundabout. That roundabout is terrifying because of that extra lane from eastbound 5th Street to southbound going over the bridge, so that any cyclist or pedestrian has to engage with motorists in 2 locations to hope that they're going to actually yield to you and stop there. So now it's bad enough with the right turn lane that you have to worry that no one's going to stop there, but at least once you've passed that, now you have a light that's protecting you to some, the red light people usually do stop for. But yeah, the 2, like you have to cross, the bypass lane and then cross the roundabout and then continue on to get to the other side of the street. And I think, as Adrian noted, he said that the intersection failed if they didn't do that. And I just want to read the fine print there, that what they said is the level of service and average vehicle delay in seconds, although the delay is less than the LOSF threshold, the volume capacity ratio is greater than 1, which is LOSF according to the HCM 7th edition, the Highway Capacity Manual. Now, the Highway Capacity Manual and actually the traffic engineering profession in general gets a lot of criticism for valuing speed over safety, and I think this is a perfect example of valuing speed over safety. So to say it fails, I wish that could be fleshed out a little bit. Cars will eventually get to where they need to go. What does it really mean in terms of how long they have to wait there, and what does that mean to fail? Because obviously that type of roundabout is not going to work, and it would be nice to see one that would work. And my 5 seconds left, please take down that fence as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there is no other public comment, we'll close public comment and open this up for commissioner discussion. And Ryan, are you looking for specific recommendations from us in the form of a motion, or are you just mainly taking commissioner comments?
If there's a motion, I would appreciate it, but I can take comments as well. If I could have a minute to talk about a couple things that came up during public comment?
Yes.
So I think the first one is just a general discussion about level of service. We did look at level of service, especially in conformance with the city's general plan, since that's still our standard for all the intersections. With the roundabout specifically, when we're talking about failing, it's beyond the level of service. We're talking about gridlock. We're talking about the entire thing jams up and we start queuing excessively in all directions. This is on VMT is CEQA. It is the new standard. It is what we do. In the cases of a Broadway project like that, what we're looking at and what we're concerned about is induced demand. We do not want to add automobile capacity. This project does not add automobile capacity. It would not have a CEQA impact as such. It does enhance bicycle facilities and depending on what alternatives are selected, would promote and encourage bicycling, which is very consistent with VMT policies and what we're trying to accomplish with CEQA at this point.
Great. Thank you for that. With that, we'll open up to discussion from commissioners. Commissioners? Mark?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a fair number of things to get through tonight, and I'm not going to queue them all up at once. But in responding to what Ryan just shared, I would point out that before the restriping exercise, there was apparently a level of service of 12,000 vehicles per day, and after the restriping exercise, the improvements, There's still the same level of service, 12,000 vehicles a day, and I actually cycled that stretch again today, and I appreciate how it's improved a lot compared to what it was. There will be a lot more to be said about what we are hoping to achieve here. So I'm not trying to take away from the fact that the reduction to a single lane is already made for improvements compared to the old state. But I think the data so far tell us that we have not succeeded in reducing vehicles on the road simply by the fact that our level of service numbers stay the same. Can maybe, right, 12,000 cars before, 12,000 cars after, that's the same number.
Correct. The lane reduction did not push traffic into other parts of the community.
Or the lane reduction did not incentivize people to shift transportation modes to the same bikes and pedestrians, which is, despite the fact that they've gotten somewhat better, and I think we can probably also talk about how they can further improve upon what it is now, we haven't succeeded in incentivizing people to not take cars down that corridor where they could, for some trips, take a bike or an e-bike or walk.
I don't have pedestrian and bicycle counts prior to the project, but it may be the case that there are more people walking and riding on that corridor than there were before the road diet. I just don't have that data to show.
I guess I would echo, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would echo what some of the other public comments that we heard said about keeping the bikes as physically removed from the cars as possible being something I think is a good way to encourage or incentivize bike travel. I know my family were one of many Davis families with the, I believe it's called the Davis minivan. It's the e-bike with 2 kids on the back. This is one of the more perilous parts of town to carry away our toddlers. So anything that creates a physical, psychological, distance between the traffic road and the bike traffic road is a big positive, I think, to those of us who ride with little kids. I know there aren't that many of us, but you see them. So I would agree with that. Otherwise, I think all of the various options that they all seem to, from my perspective, to none of them seem horrible. They all seem to be some improvement from where we are, and certainly a bigger improvement from what this looked like before. That said, I personally, as a rider, I don't mind two-way bike travel if it's done correctly, as much as perhaps some other people, maybe because I lived in Portland, Oregon for several years, where that's what it's like on a lot of bridges. So I guess I would say, from my perspective, none of those options seem terrible. I would be inclined to support any of them if there was a compelling reason why they were much more affordable or more feasible or could be accomplished faster or something like that. Personally, I think greater removal of the bikes from the traffic would be a priority for me, and I suppose more shade and more trees and a nicer pedestrian pathway would be another thing that I would personally prioritize. But all of these options are better than the status quo.
I think I'd just say I support the direction that the BTSSC came up with this originally in terms of the layout, and I think it still works well for this area. I do want to echo Anthony's comments about the roundabout in that area. I think that having to cross over again through what's just essentially another slip lane is no better than what we currently have there in terms of having to cross over multiple traffic lanes to get across that. Also, it appears from the report that roundabout really doesn't, the footprint would be very difficult to fit into that particular intersection there. I think it went out to the sound wall on one side, or the wall, the retaining wall on one side there. So, I mean, as much as I think that roundabouts are a great, great traffic control device, I just think in this spot, it may not be the best fit for this area. And then April, let me just say this before I forget it, but, and I do also believe that the crossing over from the south lane, from the south side to the north side is really important. I think it's one of the biggest challenges in a lot of areas where we have bike lanes moving back and forth across, is creating some sort of method that is apparent to bicyclists how they're getting there and providing them with a way of getting there that's safe and not having to stop, cross. So yeah, I think that crossover there is a very important issue to be addressed. Sorry, Adrian. Oh, on that roundabout, I don't know, it looked like you had.
Oh, I was just going to say that, yeah, with the inclusion of the bypass lane, the footprint of the roundabout does encroach into the parcel and the retaining wall that's on the southwest corner there.
Okay. Yeah, it didn't sound that that was particularly feasible, particularly considering it also would go into the post office property there. And it seems like that exit from the post office would also become an issue, so trying to get out the way that you currently.
Yeah, so our analysis was done on an aerial. I think one of the next steps in terms of moving the roundabout forward in terms of feasibility would be doing some sort of three-dimensional design with profile of Pauline Road and some of the grades of the parcels behind and how those access points could be maintained and or modified to be able to accommodate. So my analysis is two-dimensional to try to get the tape that would fit and what the feasibility was. If the roundabout moves forward, there's some additional considerations that should be taken into account with a detailed mapping.
Yeah, I guess personally, I think the changes to make a more traditional intersection there as opposed to the roundabout may work better from a bicyclist standpoint. But like I said, certainly roundabout can be a good solution. I'm just not sure it's a good solution in this particular spot.
Californians are really bad at roundabouts, so it's just, I mean, it's a.
We need more practice.
Yeah, this is a unique community in that we're constantly cycling sort of through transitory 30,000 people population, every so often through the university. So there are always people, it's a huge percent of the community and the drivers and the cyclists who don't know the area very well. And so having unique traffic designs, or maybe not unique's the wrong word, but having non-standard for California traffic designs, I think is maybe I would be a little bit more conservative.
A wonderful education opportunity, because all those 30,000 students will go on and will actually, to their future communities, actually know the knowledge of how to navigate around about. I mean, this is coming from a continent where they are so commonplace and have proven to be so much safer that we would be remiss to not consider them seriously for every option if designed correct.
And so much more complicated than anything we have here is a roundabout. So, Andy, do you?
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. First of all, really appreciate the presentation, and also in general, of course, very excited to see this road diet moving ahead as a permanent project in any of these forms. And it's certainly a great improvement over what was there before 2020, much safer, much encourages me to use this corridor and go to the places along it. So excited to see this moving ahead to any of the alternatives. I would like to echo our chair's comment that I think, certainly, again, there could be other roundabout designs that we haven't seen that could work well, but I think of the options that we've seen, the protected intersection, any of the protected intersections design at Fifth and Pole Line would work better than the roundabout option that we're seeing here. And also Also along those lines, I think one thing that hasn't come up is that in addition to a protected intersection, it could be useful to look at improving the options for biking underneath the pole line underpass. Like right now, it's possible to go, if you're going eastbound, you can go right, and then instead of going through the intersection, you can go right and then take the bike path that goes underneath and then through the Sunwork parking lot and back to pole line to continue either north on pole line or east on 5th Street. But that's been it's kind of awkward when you have to go through the gravel parking lot at Sunwork, and also coming westbound, even it's awkward navigating that area around the post office. We have to go up onto the sidewalk for a second. But I think one thought is it could be that it could be useful to work. I mean, involve some coordination with the businesses to improve that option to having some sort of bikeway that goes through the post office, like through like the Sunwork, some design where it would be easier to bike, especially westbound through through the post office parking lot and through Sunwork, so that you can continue through there without actually having to navigate the intersection. Again, not a replacement for the protected intersection, but something to consider as a way, especially connecting the apartment complex to the Olive Drive connection. And again, just improving that, giving people an option for avoiding having to navigate traffic on the intersections is something to consider there. And then last but not least, piggybacking on the LOS VMT discussion, even though, again, I mean, I agree, I'm definitely excited in this project, I'm excited, I mean, I agree with staff that it certainly aligns with the goal of reducing VMT, so really happy to see that. But in general, still would prefer just to see less discussion of LOS in general in the analysis of the presentation. Again, even though it's not much of an issue on this project, I know we have had other instances where there have been road diets done, but then in the name of LOS, lanes get added back in, as we saw on Mace. So I think just some of what you might be hearing is like PTSD from that, as well as, of course, other projects around the region and just designs that prioritize cars over people. So just something to consider, just as you continue with this and in future projects, that just some of that concern around LOS is just that it's a metric that it prefers, it prioritizes, it says that a 15-mile trip at 50 miles per hour is better than a 2-mile trip at 20 miles per hour, which just doesn't make sense. So again, just something, just in general, I think it's, again, just a more general discussion around that metric, not specific to this project, but wanted to get that in there.
Mark?
Yeah, so I have a number of more comments and suggestions, or maybe things that can be considered as recommendations. I'll try and go through chronologically in the report as I have it in front of me. That fence has puzzled me since I moved to Davis 10 years ago. It gives you a lot more space if you remove it. I assume that's going to be done no matter what. And that's going to give you whatever, like just more space to play with. I see Brian wants to comment.
Yeah, I'm itching to get rid of that fence.
So, and then a comment on this two-way biking. I see in the report, and I apologize I'm late to this discussion because this is my first year on the commission, but I see in the report that we accept that there is two-way biking on one side of that street, and it's accepted as this is the current condition, and therefore we continue with that. And I think I don't understand where it's coming from. I can imagine scenarios why people might have ridden two ways on one side of the roadway because that might have been the safest choice or the most convenient choice. But what it does is it sets up a conflict between cyclists at increasing speeds with increasing speed differentials positioned to be passing each other more closely, and that's going forward. Where we want more e-bikes, we want to embrace them as the climate solution that they are, we want to plan for them, and not having micromobility at increasing speeds, 20 miles an hour for a Class 2 e-bike, without that same physical barrier we're talking about is maybe not the best design choice. And also, as soon as you look at any of the intersections, anytime you get then to now having two-way traffic on each side you have to accommodate, I mean, it really makes those traffic intersections much more complicated. I think there's a lot to be said also from experience. Cyclists are on the right, and that's how they travel, and it makes probably your design job easier, particularly when it comes to the pinch points at each of these intersections. Can we not do that and use the additional space to create whatever buffers we need to meet all our design demands for fire, make sure we have a physical curb where we want it to protect the cyclists from the vehicles and protect, where possible, the pedestrians from the cyclists, so that we can just dedicate space for everyone who we want on our roads. Maybe comment on that, and I'll have a couple more.
Yeah, I'll address the two-way facility, because that did come up in a number of conversations with both the community, the BTSC last time I was here, and then just generally the staff. Typically, we're not proposing two-way cycle tracks in most of our projects because of the challenges that they have in intersections. That's a known issue. For this particular project, the context makes sense for a couple of reasons. One is all of the bicycle traffic is on the west side of Poline Road that's coming through bidirectional there. So a lot of that traffic continues to downtown off of that bridge. And it limits them having to cross over at the Poline and 5th Street intersection by maintaining the two-way bike facility along the south side of Poline. It does move that conflict to L Street. And so you do have to accommodate that. The volumes in L are lower and can make a safer crossing. The second challenge that we saw and we heard from the community was the parking protected separated bikeway on the north side was not preferred because of the businesses that are along that area and the parking that would be removed as part or limited as part of the project, and to have the bikeway between the parking and the curb was perceived as not as ideal for the businesses and the people getting out of the parked cars to those businesses. And so that's why the buffered bike lane was maintained on the north side, is trying to preserve that curb access for those businesses along there. And that was the feedback that we got.
So if I translate your explanation, people exiting cars feel vulnerable and therefore want to be protected from people on bikes, whereas the cyclists, who are normally more vulnerable, having to navigate the always ever-present risk of a dooring. I appreciate the concern, but I think it's actually maybe a good educational opportunity. And with the additional space that you can generate, you can also create a buffer to make sure that you protect the folks who are coming out of their vehicles so they can exit safely, look left and right, and cross the bike lane. My recommendation strongly is to, going forward, particularly on what is a main east-west corridor in Davis, to have bike lanes on the outside of where we store and park our cars. Okay, so a couple more, so then going back to the options as we're presenting them, I think that's the main one. The hybrid option or the compromise option that I think we're going for has the drivers cross over the bike lane, creating a conflict every single time they do so. And in doing so, creates, like, this is the thing that I worry about every single day when I send my kids to school, that kind of conflict, where there is nothing preventing a driver, even if they're legally allowed to cross the bicycle lane to park, to do so and create, I mean, one moment of inattention is all it takes. And you eliminate that if you design the parking such that the drivers don't have to navigate that bike lane. And then you create a buffer on the curbside so that the driver can still safely cross. I think with Davis, I appreciate that my colleagues are saying that, look, it was worse before, but I think if we're serious about our commitments to having inclusive traffic, I think we need to also be following what we all know is the safest way to manage the need for cars to access businesses and make our roadways so that people will actually willingly use them, including people who right now is not, because it's not sufficiently safe. We talked about the intersections. I think they're complicated, and I think they're complicated in part because of a two-way facility. And my recommendation still is to consider that, to reconsider that, because it is the intersections where I think in half the conflicts are happening, right? That's the location where most of your potential exists. So I think avoiding having to navigate, having to deal with the fact that you now have to pick up two-way traffic is probably going to make your life more job easier. So just I would go for that. And then there's one more. The roundabout. This roundabout. I was a little bit sad about the roundabout. The roundabout. Everything about this roundabout screams that cars go first and cyclists have to wait. If that's the message that we want to send, then put a roundabout down that looks like this. And why do I say that? I say that because by the time that cyclists get to cross, the driver is already on his or her way into the departing lane from the roundabout. This is not what a Dutch roundabout looks like. It's not even close. It also makes the cyclists, I mean, my colleague on the commission just mentioned having an elongated, what I it took to be a longer bike that accommodates a couple of children. I mean, imagine having to navigate a very tight turn in just a slightly longer e-bike, let alone a cargo bike, which are also going to be more and more prevalent. I mean, we need to design these facilities for not the traffic we have today, but the diversity of micromobility that we are hoping to achieve. And if this is how you design them, they're not going to come. So this roundabout also has really sharp turns, at least on 2 of the legs, two-way traffic. That's challenging for a driver. Like now we're making it really hard for a driver to try and safely navigate that roundabout, because now they have to, on 2 of the legs, look left and right, whereas normally on the regular roundabout, everybody goes the same way. The only way they have to look is to make sure there's no drivers coming from the right, and there's no cyclists coming on their right-hand side, who they have to deal with and pay attention to. Again, this makes that a lot harder. Just putting a picture of a roundabout up and saying, well, this roundabout doesn't work, so therefore we can't do roundabouts, is just, I don't think, doing our community service going in the longer term. Okay? And then the final one is the stretch between Pole Line Road and Cantrell Drive. It's beautifully wide. We have this massive area that we're completely buffering out for everybody. Here's an opportunity to actually use some of that striped off zone, and I don't know, I'm just throwing out an idea, and maybe actually create a wider bike lane so that we can accommodate the speed differential between regular bikes and e-bikes. Again, this is the main corridor coming from East Davis to downtown. This is a corridor we prioritize for active mobility in our climate action adaptation plan. We hope to entice higher volumes of micromobility here. Well, maybe allow people to navigate that stretch in anything but a car with varying speeds. 20 miles an hour on a class 2 assisted e-bike gets you there probably in 7 minutes flat if you design the roads. Like within the speed limit. If you design the speed so it actually becomes an experience that you can go from your home in East Davis to downtown on a simple e-assist bike. But you're going to probably get a lot of people complaining or being slow to adapt if the bikeways are so narrow that you're going to get a lot of people whizzing past each other and not accommodating the fact that you have the differences in speed. So here's the tarmac is there, right? So let's use it for that, rather than just striping it off and not using it for anybody. Give it to the e-bikes or to the cyclist, or make it, if it's possible within the design, make a wider pedestrian facility. But basically, just give space to the type of traffic that we all say we want, because in this particular case, on a main east-west corridor, is already there. All right, thank you.
Yeah, Mark, I'll just, I think you raised a really good point about the bidirectional traffic, particularly when we're looking at, increased use of e-bikes and that type of thing, where we're in a, 10-foot corridor there with people coming at each other, or I think 12-foot on the other one. I think it's a really good point. I do think though that, the issue becomes how, because there is the traffic coming off the bridge, it's all on that one side, then, the issue is how you make that transition to the other side, and whether you make it at the pole line where you have higher volumes and more turning movements going on, or whether you do that at L Street. And I don't have a solution for that, but I can see, I know how we kind of came to that solution when we first talked about it, was to make it easier on those bicyclists, a lot of whom are, students coming down that way. But I see your point too. I mean, I think that is one of the issues with the bidirectional, is particularly with the increased use of e-bikes and the speeds. that can be kind of problematic, and particularly because we have a lot of people on e-bikes that are not very proficient in using e-bikes or on e-scooters or whatever, who are not always really good at maneuvering those within a small space. So, anyway, it's a good consideration.
The army of professional Door Dashers who ride on the e-bikes that have invisible pedals.
Yeah, a couple quick comments to follow up. One regarding the two-way bikeway discussion and the concerns about that is I think one other solution to consider for folks coming off of the bridge, as well as for folks coming off of the bridge would be, and this would be probably more of a long-term thing, would be looking at another option that you have for getting to downtown if you're coming off the Pole Line Bridge is to go down to 2nd Street, go down that way, and then make a left onto 3rd or 4th Street, but right now making that left once you turn onto L is pretty sketchy, and the bike lanes on 2nd Street aren't great either. So it could be that in the longer term, looking at improving that bike infrastructure could help make it. It could be an alternative to having to provide a 2-way bikeway on 5th Street, addressing some of those concerns about cyclists more in close proximity to each other. So just something to consider there. And then also, I do want to just remind folks that, this, in addition to biking, this is a major corridor for transit as well. When you have a lot of local Unitrans service going out to the apartments on 5th Street, as well as the 42 YOLO bus's main intercity line. So I think I did see a bus bulb out in the 5th and Pole Line proposed design. So happy to see that. But I do want to just encourage the importance of both. I think bulb out stops are a great fit for this corridor, making sure the buses don't have to pull out of traffic each time they stop and can just stop in the lane. That helps speed up travel times. And then also taking this opportunity to improve the facilities at the stops as well, making sure we have good benches, shelters, lighting to make it a better experience for people to wait for the bus.
So I believe one in the proposal was to move the bus drop-offs there closer to where that mid-block crossing would be on both the north and south side. And then I think there's also there's a bus stop near the roundabout near Cantrell also. There's a fairly good size pull out there for the bus.
Yes.
So if there's nothing more specific, or Mark, if you have something else to add, do we want to develop any recommendations that we want to frame as a motion, or do we want to just leave the comments for staff and consultants to sort through?
Maybe I can ask a clarifying question on procedure then. Do we have time to revisit some of these, specifically the two-way traffic and how you handle the bike traffic on that road, so that we can come to a better informed proposal to advise you? I recognize that there's always a time crunch when you want to make sure you can make improvements, but I also think that here's an opportunity to look carefully at what is a really important corridor for all transit that would make it better for all road users, including people who drive their cars.
I mean, I believe this is still a conceptual project, right? I mean, we're still talking about what are alternatives and what we would move forward with.
Yeah, so the only constraint I have is we did use some SACOG money to fund this as a grant, and I do need to get the project closed out probably by April or May of next year. We don't have any grant funding to move forward with any further design other than some restriping which could be as simple as replace what's existing. I'm trying to figure out how much of this could be deferred to a design phase. I think intersection improvements could, but whether or not we're pursuing a two-way cycle track on the south side of the road, it really needs to be answered sooner than later.
I mean, with regards to intersection design, when we're talking about the roundabout, we don't really even have a design. I mean, as you said, we'd have to do further study to really determine what would fit in that footprint there.
Yeah, I mean, we did traffic analysis and a footprint just to see what the feasibility of a roundabout was in the space that was provided.
Okay. If we were to recommend re-looking at the two-way cycle track, what would be the implications of that from a project schedule standpoint or feasibility?
That would really be delaying my ability to start searching for grant funding, which there's no guarantee there. If I delay it, it would be 2 years for the next cycle. For a SACOG grant, or looking at some of the federal grants, which also seem to come out on even numbered years.
May I suggest that this project needs grant funding regardless, whether or not the project finally goes in with a two-way cycle track or an alternative solution may not necessarily prevent you from starting the process internally now. I say this as somebody who writes grants for different areas for a living.
It really depends on the grant source and how defined they want these issues to be developed. A lot of, especially FHWA grants, are very concerned about right-of-way. And if your project has any known right-of-way acquisition, that's normally not a benefit for the project. They want that cleared up before the funding's committed to the project.
So, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, the improvements on Fifth are essentially, I mean, other than the roundabout or whatever intersection improvements done there at Pole Line, are really curb to curb.
Yes.
We're not asking for any additional right-of-way, whether it's a single track or a double track there. It really, the only area we would be looking at right-of-way improvements or right-of-way acquisition would be if you were putting in a larger footprint roundabout at Pole Line.
Yeah, well, either alternative that we've got for Fifth and Pole Line, there's in the northeast quadrant, there's right-of-way impacts here, and there's potential right-of-way impacts again up in this quadrant, down here, potentially here as well. But as far as just revisiting this, we could look at it, we could bring it back to your commission for further discussion. I would be curious as to what measures we'd be looking at to determine which approach to go forward, and so we can graph the analysis you did.
So if I'm kind of understanding what the comments we've had, I think we've sort of focused on whether the two-way cycle track is still a preferred alternative on the south side. And I think we've also focused on the feasibility of the roundabout versus a protected intersection design. Is that consistent with what everybody's been hearing?
Plus the discussion around moving the bike lanes outside of where cars park, making sure that that's designed in a way that will be safe for people to exit cars as well as for cyclists to continue on that path.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a consideration when we've looked at these. It's kind of, you know, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages, obviously, from, you know, where the cars are, where the bicyclists are. But yeah, it's also a good point. Do we want to put any of that into a recommendation as a motion? Or do we have enough consensus to even make it a motion?
I guess my thought, I mean, this isn't a motion yet, but I think on the roundabout, I think certainly, again, given what's been presented to us, I've heard consensus, pretty good consensus, I feel like, that any of the protected intersection options that we've seen are better than the roundabout option that we've seen in terms of the options available. In terms of the two-way cycle track, I think that in order to recommend, at least personally, in order to recommend against a two-way cycle track, there would have to be a stronger commitment to another option for as they mentioned, Second Street being an option, but that would need to be in parallel with still accounting for folks that are coming off the bridge and going towards downtown. It would have to be. And if there weren't a serious alternate route recommended, I probably would stick with the two-way, unless we're going to be done in parallel with stuff on Second Street or something like that. That's at least
My sense is that the motion we would have right now would be a motion geared towards guiding staff and what we'd like to see in another meeting. So, I think we heard a lot of very thoughtful input from Mark, and if he has a motion ready. I suspect that we would find some consensus in voting on it. Or perhaps we would want to make amendments to it.
Okay, I'll try, thank you. So I'll make a motion to, on short term, revisit the key discussion points, two-way cycle track, location of protected bike lanes and physically protected bike lanes on the main thoroughfare, so that we can provide staff with a recommendation, so they can move forward after that. I hope that was an appropriate motion. If not, people can amend it or second.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there a discussion on the motion? So I guess the only thing I would propose maybe amending the motion to include maybe we do it as a separate motion. Sorry, I'll go away from that. Is there any discussion on the motion?
So just to clarify, so the motion would be to recommending like a relook at the two-way cycle track and the designs for Fifth and Full Line?
No, I think you just mentioned the.
Okay, so just the two.
Protected.
Oh, yeah, the
parking
bike lanes.
Parking bike lanes. We did not discuss the intersection.
Oh, okay. So I think for those two, I'd say it's one friendly amendment to the two-way cycle track portion would be to have it be like recommend alternatives that still account for like optimize safe and efficient travel for folks coming off the Pole Line Bridge and going to downtown, but looking at potential alternatives to the two-way cycle track that still do that.
I'm amenable to that.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, with that, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I guess I'd like to propose a motion which would be that for a preference for the protected intersection as versus the roundabout solution at Fifth. I guess pending further study of the roundabout based on a more specific design alternative, if that makes sense.
Could you repeat
So,
that?
yeah, I guess my motion would be to, the direction would be to the preference for a protected intersection design versus the roundabout, pending a further refinement of the roundabout design based on actual conditions, design conditions.
Provide some discussion, or do we? Wait
Well, that's still pending a second.
Second.
So now I'll open up for discussion on the motion.
I guess I'm curious with staff, how much of a hassle are we looking at to continue to evaluate the roundabout that we think we probably don't like?
I think the bigger concern, which is going to change the design of almost anything, is whether or not we're pursuing the cycle track on the street, or we're switching over to a one-lane design. I can probably come back to something for you, just showing what the paths to travel are for the cycle track and what we were thinking there. And I can probably come back to something with you that would show what the impacts to parking on the street are, and at least what their current parking utilization is for further discussion at your December meeting. Redoing the intersection analysis, when we don't really know what our cross-section is, I would really recommend we hold off on that. I hear you loud and clear that the preference versus the current roundabout versus the protected intersection is to the protected intersection. I also think that when we get into design, there will be a need to do what Caltrans would call an intersection control evaluation, which would be a detailed analysis between a roundabout and a signalized intersection at that location.
I mean, I guess I'd be willing to withdraw the motion and just leave that as part of the part of the discussion with the cycle track. If you want to withdraw the second.
He seconded.
Oh, you
Yeah,
seconded.
that's fine. I can withdraw the second.
Once I already, okay, so we'll leave that out at the moment, but yeah, I think there is, you know, and it would be pending, you know, more, a further evaluation of what that intersection would look like. Great, well, thank you all for the discussion on that, I thought that was great, that was some very good input. So with that, yes,
One
Ryan.
piece of bookkeeping, we have one more item on the agenda,
Yes,
but we've gone past our 2 hours, so if the commission would like to take that up, I would need a vote to continue.
so we're looking for a motion to continue the meeting to address our final items. Is there a motion to do that?
I'll make a motion to continue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on continuing? No discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Carries unanimously, we will carry on. So the next item is new state law SB 413, California daylighting law and impacts on Davis. And Ryan, do you want to tell us all about daylighting?
Oh, yeah. So I've got a very brief PowerPoint here and really wanted to talk about where we are for implementing this. So as you said, it's Assembly Bill 413, and the new law prohibits parking, standing, or stopping of a vehicle upstream of the marked crosswalk. If it's 20 feet upstream of the crosswalk, unless there's a bulb out, then it's only 15 feet. The removed spaces can be used for a couple other purposes, either commercial loading zones or bicycle parking, so a bicycle corral of some sort. It becomes enforceable January 1st of 2025. Staff started looking at the impacts downtown, since that's where we have the most marked parking spaces right now, and it impacts 56 spaces, including 20-minute parking spaces. This exhibit really shows what we've got. On the left hand is what we've had historically, where we've allowed parking up until the crosswalk. You can see the zone in the red triangle where the car blocks the motorist and pedestrian on the sidewalk from being able to see each other. By pulling that red curve back, we've opened up those sight distance lines so that people can see each other and help reduce collisions or conflicts. The focus of what I've already said, the focus is what we've done is downtown. I met with Downtown Davis Business Association last week. I'll give you an update on that in a minute. But we also, this is a new law that affects all crosswalks marked or unmarked citywide. Just as a reminder, any intersection is a spot where the pedestrians are allowed to cross the street. California Vehicle Code calls it a crosswalk, whether or not it's painted. And the daylighting law would apply to every single one of those intersections. So we are currently looking at along the suggested routes to school. We're working on a list of locations that will require red curbs or signs to be installed. Really focusing on areas where the trail network actually interacts with the road, and we've created a mid-block crosswalk to make sure that we target those areas first, and then it's any other location where we're encouraging children to take a specific path to school. Really committed to marking those and getting those defined and well delineated over the next 3 to 6 months. In residential neighborhoods, really looking at this as an issue similar with the fire hydrants. The law is the law, whether or not we paint it, you're not allowed to park there. If we have problems where we've got issues, we hear from residents that there's problems, we'll go in and we'll mark it. But you're also not allowed to park in front of the fire hydrant, and for the most part, with proper education, we have been able to kind of enforce that without going through the expense of painting and then having to repaint these locations. Part of that proper education is I'm working with our communications team and trying to figure out how we would broadcast this either through social media or those other channels I'm not great at. Met with the Downtown Davis Business Association last week to talk about the downtown areas. We really had 2 questions for them. Is there a desire to find replacement locations for some or all of the 20-minute spaces? And then is there a desire for bike parking in these locations or for loading zones? They're working on putting together a subcommittee, and I will be working with them over the next couple months to come up with a plan that I can bring back to you when we have something to report. And then what I'm looking for from you all tonight is to receive this presentation and provide any input. I do have in the staff report exhibits for the 56 locations downtown, if you guys wanted to dig into some or all of them in more detail. And if there's something I glossed over that you want to go on to, please let me know.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Are there any clarifying questions from commissioners? I guess I had one clarifying question. Did you say that the daylighted area could be used as a loading zone?
Commercial loading zone, not passenger loading zone.
Correct, but it's a commercial loading zone.
Yes.
How does that make it any safer? Sorry, I'm just trying to envision a box truck parking there instead of a sedan.
I'm not, so it's what's in the law. I'm not quite sure how we got there. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the commercial loading normally happens at different times of day than the pedestrian traffic. And they were just looking at opportunities to not kill a bunch of curb space. This is statewide, and this is affecting a lot of communities. And there's been a lot of heartache in some communities about it.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions from commissioners? Okay, with that, we'll open it up for public comment.
Hi, Trish Price again. Just one thing I'd like to point out, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with leaving the decision about whether it should be bike parking or commercial loading zones to the Downtown Business Association alone. I think we should get more input from the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on this, Mark?
Sure, I have a couple. First of all, I think it's great that this law is there because it's ultimately designed to make pedestrian transportation safer. Maybe starting with options that we have to use that space that no longer will be used for parking will be helpful if you can give us a visual, maybe not right now, but what a bike corral would look like and what, like, would it just be an open spot marked out for any type of bike, which would be the simplest way to implement, or do we have something more elaborate in mind?
I think at the basic level, it would be an area that we would paint out, install delineators to make sure that it's a space for bicycles.
Yeah.
And then we would mount some sort of bicycle rack in the space. I am exploring a couple other options. I think there might be an opportunity for public art or murals or something else to help engage and make the space more active.
That sounds wonderful, yeah. And the type of bike racks, I'm sure, will be accommodating different types of cyclists and cycles that we have. Maybe on the loading dock issue, I mean, clearly that is not a safe way to use that space, but we also have a need to make sure that businesses in downtown can be supplied by vehicles. So maybe the path to explore here is maybe a recommendation to city staff is to, for certain types of day that we say that we have loading and unloading happening, where also, similar to bike and pedestrian traffic not being at its peak, vehicle traffic is not at its peak, one can reserve and block off curbside parking for loading vehicles, commercial loading vehicles, so that we can accommodate the business needs of the Downtown Business Association. I think there is an easy solution there that I would recommend that we explore. Sorry, you sounded like you look like you were going to respond to that.
No, you're right, and that's one of the things that I really want to reach back to them with as we have this conversation. It can be commercial loading, we can sign at 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then at 10 a.m. forward it becomes not bike parking, but other zones could go back to being automobile parking or whatever else the need is.
Sorry, let me clarify, I was not clear. Don't do this at the daylighted zones, but set aside other, maybe central block areas specifically for loading and unloading so that we can accommodate the needs of the businesses downtown. But probably at no circumstance have those daylighted zones be ever used or suggested they can ever be used to interrupt the line of sight. And I think that would be two birds, one stone. Like everybody gets ahead that way. because I see sometimes commercial vehicles loading where they shouldn't because we don't afford space to them to do it safely. I think here's the win. There are, another recommendation as we are learning to roll this out is to not just limit this to downtown. I appreciate why we start there, I acknowledge that, and I think that's appropriate, but there's also, particularly along the safe routes to school, the major corridors, my neck of the wood, you know, there's Lake and Covell, but any of the more larger thoroughfares, these issues exist. I think those should be number 2 priority to start to proactively address rather than wait for people to complain, with maybe some posts and some red curbs, as well as some education. And as part of that, I assume that we're working with City of Davis Police Department to make sure that they're aware of any kind of push to make sure that the community is now aware of the change. I'm not suggesting that they should go out in full force and fine, but that we all help our community learn that this is a change and this is a state law, and whether you like it or not, I think it's ultimately for the best, and that means you can't park here anymore. That was it.
Let me follow up on Mark's comments. Obviously I have some concern about using those red zones as commercial loading also, but I also understand that taking more spaces to create additional commercial loading zones separate from these is also going to run into a lot of opposition because they're already taking away a lot of downtown parking to do this. But I guess my question would be, can we swap existing, in terms of mitigating some of the parking loss that is going to raise some issues downtown, is it possible to swap them for existing commercial loading zones so that, and then, like I said, I'm not crazy about that idea, I'm just saying in terms of looking at the overall parking lot.
There aren't a lot of commercial loading zones downtown. I think there's 2 or 3.
No.
If I had the way to swap them out, I would, but it's just not something that was really been implemented. There was, I don't think this has really been a discussion we've had in a while. It sounds like many years ago there was a discussion around commercial loading zones downtown. And really the desire was to kind of continue what we're seeing right now with some double parking or a lot of early deliveries, but not create the restrictions that you would normally see where the commercial loading zones would essentially shut off at 10 a.m. and become general parking.
Andy, do you have something?
A couple quick things. So I think, one as you work with the business association, just I think one suggestion for staff to keep in mind, there's a lot of research out there, of course, that business owners they assume that more people drive to their businesses than actually do, and that fewer people walk or take transit to those businesses. And just in those discussions, if there are opportunities to just keep that in mind as you get their feedback, and then also if there are opportunities to educate them on that, and I encourage you to take advantage of those. Also, in terms of the non-downtown areas, a common problem seems to be the multi-use path entrances at the ends of cul-de-sacs. Commonly seem to be blocked. I think it's not really a malicious thing, but I think folks just assume that they might not realize there's a path there, or just assume the end of the cul-de-sac functions as a parking lot, rather than even that people might, and they don't see it as a place that people would be traveling through to access the path system. So that's something that I would suggest. I would suggest marking those as no parking, because again that would just help educate folks. Because I don't think folks are trying to block the path or think it should be parking or oppose the path being there, but they just might not understand. But if the signage were there, they wouldn't block the path, and that would create a safer environment for everyone. So I'd suggest including that in the red curb and signage program.
Any other comments from commissioners? Councilmember?
Yeah, can I ask just a quick question? I don't know what the visibility implications are, if there's ways to design this, but tomorrow, council is hearing a presentation from KDNC on the downtown outdoor dining program. So I don't know if these are appropriate spaces or
I'm going to have to look into that. that, if it was constructed like a bulb out, the way the law's written, it would probably be permissible use. But like I said, I'll have to look into it and see what we can do. I don't think there's gonna be many spaces that the businesses are looking at that would actually meet the requirement for the daylighting wall.
Okay, I don't think there's anything that necessarily needs to be made as a motion or anything at this point, so if there's no other discussion or questions for Ryan, we'll close that item. And with that, the next is the long-range calendar. So upcoming meeting dates and potential agenda items. Jennifer, can you provide an overview of our long-range calendar, please? Or
I'm gonna
Ryan?
run this one.
Okay.
So we aren't gonna have a meeting next month. The meeting date would have been Veterans Day. So we will be back in December. Right now, we got 2 items on the calendar, the annual traffic calming review and the Anderson 30% road design plans. I'm also going to bring back, or try to bring back the 5th Street item that we discussed today with the further discussion that the commission is looking for.
Any clarifying questions? I do have one, which was on potential items. I think at the last meeting, we discussed having some agenda item regarding drive-through criteria and standards, and some discussion of that, if that could, I know that's not necessarily immediate, but if it could be put on the to be determined
We
list.
will get that on the list, and I will get that turned around as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
So our next meeting is presumably December 9th.
Okay, anything else on the long-range calendar,
Yes.
commissioners? Yes, no? Okay.
Just one quick thing, would just, I think if we could get an update on the NACE project. I mean, as I recall, when there were future phases planned of that, including the the pilot of the signals south of Davis, as well as, I mean, just the impacts that most of the project that was done last year has had on travel times and traffic counts through that corridor. It would be useful to get an update on that.
Most definitely.
All right. If there's nothing else at this point from the long-range calendar, then do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Very great discussions this evening, and appreciate all your input.